I died with my eyes open. That's the first thing I remember, the impossible clarity. They told me once that death comes in a blur, in the fog of shock, the sudden emptiness of a candle snuffed. But mine came in fire. A sharp crack, the air trembling, and then nothing of earth or sky. Instead, a sound like a hammer falling on an anvil, a note struck so perfectly it rang through my bones, though those bones were already ash. When I woke, the world was heat and dust. The ground beneath me was not soil, but a scabbed sheet of black iron, dusted with ash so fine it clung to my breath. Every step I took left a mark that hissed and smoked, as though even the land resented being walked upon. The air was thick with the taste of copper, metallic, hot, sharp, like a forge that had never known cooling. The horizon pulsed with a glow I couldn't name at first, until I realized it was not the sun, but something deeper. A rhythm, a heartbeat, a continent-sized organ beating molten blood into the sky. And then I heard it, the cadence. It wasn't marching as I knew it, with footfalls and breath. It was heavier, slower, each impact resonating as if a mountain had moved. The rhythm was steady, unbroken, eternal. No human army could have kept such a step. It was as though the realm itself marched to its own heart, and I stood upon its veins. I turned, and I saw them. Walls. Not built stone, not fortress brick, but a mountain range of brass cast and hammered by titans. Spires as tall as cities, sharpened into cruel barbs. Ramparts crusted with skulls fused into the metal, their teeth bared, their sockets empty yet staring. They stretched into infinity, horizon to horizon, every inch bristling with the trophies of war. The Brass Citadel, fortress, temple, and throne. It wasn't made to keep anything out. It was made to remind everything inside that there was nowhere else to be. I should have felt terror. My training should have screamed at me to find cover, to arm myself, to fight, the instinct that said I stood in the place of endings. But terror never came. Instead, there was a strange correction, like a crooked bone snapped into place, like I had lived my whole life half wrong, and only here, in this furnace sky, was I aligned. Then the beast came. It padded from the ash dunes as if it had always been there. A hound, though no earthly hound. Skin stretched crimson over muscles like cables, armored in bone and brass, a head split with iron fangs and burning coals for eyes. Its breath came as jets of steam, scorching enough to make the ground smoke. The flesh hound. I had heard stories whispered by priests and sergeants, half drunken in camps. Beasts that hunted oath-breakers and cowards, whose jaws locked not on flesh, but on lies. It circled me. Each pad of its claws hissed on the iron ash. Its nostrils flared, pulling in every truth I had ever spoken, every step I had taken, every moment of fear or courage. I did not move. To flinch was to confess. To cower was to admit. And so I stood, spine locked, breath steady, eyes forward. The hound's furnace breath washed across my face, hot enough to sting. For a moment it lingered, teeth inches from my throat. Then, with a grunt like an anvil cooling, it turned and padded away into the dust. Not prey, not yet. The air changed. The gates of the citadel loomed, their faces wrought in snarling demons of brass, each chain thicker than a tower, each hinge the size of a fortress gun. Without sound, they began to move. They did not creak or groan. They opened like a grin, silent but heavy, revealing the realm within. I did not think. I walked forward. My boots struck the black iron ground, and the gates swallowed me whole. Inside was not safety. Inside was not even shelter. Inside was purpose. The gates closed behind me, and the sound they made was not a sound at all. It was a verdict, like the lid of a coffin shutting, but heavier, deeper, final. The heat within was different than the plain outside. It wasn't the wild wind of a forge fire. It was contained, directed, disciplined, the kind of heat a blacksmith bends to his will. The avenue stretched wide before me, paved not with stone, but with bronze plates etched with sigils that shimmered faintly in the glow of the sky. On either side rose pikes, each tipped with a skull, each skull locked in a silent scream or a rictus grin. Some were human, some were twisted, alien, things my eyes tried to reject. A few were vast, titanic, as large as siege engines. The line of trophies was endless, and though my step faltered, I forced myself to keep walking. If the hound had taught me anything, it was that here, hesitation was death. The clangor reached me before I saw them. Steel on steel, hammer on anvil. The beat of drums that were not drums, but the hammering of shields, the roaring of juggernauts beyond the walls. The air was thick with it, a music without melody, rhythm only. It seeped into my chest until my heart fell into step with it. Warriors trained in the courts. Some were clad in armor the color of old blood and rusted iron, plates so thick they looked like walking fortresses. Horns curled from helms shaped like beasts. Axes taller than men swung in arcs that split the air. Others fought in disciplined lines, crashing shields together, spears stabbing in unison, their boots striking the ground with the same cadence I had heard outside. Every move was sharp, efficient, purposeful. They weren't sparring, they were rehearsing truth. I felt naked in comparison. My armor was gone, no insignia, no rank, no medals, just flesh, scarred and plain. The only weapon I carried was the knife I'd taken with me when I died, its handle worn smooth by years of use. Something moved ahead of me. A figure stepped into my path. Taller than me by a head, shoulders broad enough to eclipse the brass pikes behind him. His armor was deep red, chased with bronze, and his helm was wrought in the shape of a snarling dog's head. An executioner's mask made metal, its fanged maw frozen mid-snarl. Across his shoulder he bore an axe, not decorated, not gilded, but practical in its horror. It was a tool meant for one thing only, and it had done that thing countless times. He stopped, and the world seemed to stop with him. The clangor dimmed, the heat hushed, even the beat in my chest paused. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear, and then he spoke. One word: skulls. The voice was not muffled by the helm. It came through clear, raw, deep as iron dragged across stone. My throat was dry, my tongue heavy, but I knew instinctively what was being asked. Not a question, a demand, an affirmation. I looked up into the dog helm's eyes, black as coals, and I answered, mine, and whatever else I can take. For a long moment, nothing moved. The figure's stillness was heavier than 1,000 threats. Then, slowly, he inclined his head once, as if weighing me against an unseen scale, and finding me not worthless. He lifted his gauntlet and pointed. Beyond him, through a low arch festooned with chains and hooks, lay a field. The ground was cracked and scarred, deep channels etched into it like veins.
The air shimmered there, as if the heat itself bent to mark the place apart. Shapes moved within it, figures armed and armored, pacing, waiting. I understood. The arch was not an entrance, it was a summons. The dog-helmed warrior lowered his axe back across his shoulder and stepped aside. He did not speak again, nor did he need to. His silence was permission.
I walked through the arch. The moment I crossed its threshold, the world shifted. The clangor behind me muted, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from the ground itself. The cracked plain stretched out under a sky choked with ash. At its center, iron pillars ringed a circle wide enough to hold 100 fighters. The pillars burned faintly, their tops wreathed in a dim red glow. Inside the ring, 3 others waited. A woman whose armor was little more than chains wrapped around scarred flesh, twin chain blades whirring idly in her hands. She smiled when she saw me, not kindly, but as if amused by whatever fate had dragged me here. A giant in armor, hammered into the semblance of a snarling beast, his shoulders so broad I wondered if even juggernauts would move aside for him. His axe was a slab of iron studded with teeth, and he leaned on it like a staff. And a thing that should not have been alive. Its body was man-shaped, but wrong, insectal limbs jutting from its back, its torso hollowed and filled with ribs that were not its own, but trophies lashed together. Its head was a skull, stretched thin over something still moving beneath the bone. The 3 turned toward me, and in that instant I knew this was no duel, no honorable test. This was a crucible. A gong sounded, deep and brazen. The pillars flared. The hum became a roar. I tightened my grip on my knife. My old name whispered faintly in my ears, like the echo of a campfire story told long ago. It felt brittle, small. I knew then that names here were not given. They were forged. The field waited for me to prove if I deserved one. The gong's brazen note shivered across the ring and sank into my bones. The iron pillars brightened until their crowns glowed like heaped coals. Heat crawled across my skin. The ground hummed, and I felt the circle study us as a butcher studies a blade. Does it bite clean, or does it bruise? The woman smiled like she had been waiting for me specifically. Her chain blades purred and spat sparks. The giant hefted his slab axe without hurry and turned his helm toward the insect thing, as if instinct had paired them. The 3rd fighter's ribs clacked like loose mail when it moved, a wet rustle behind the bone. No one spoke rules. There were none. The ring itself was the law. The giant moved first, a thunderhead in armor. He stamped once and charged, footsteps drumming to the same subterranean beat I had heard outside the gates. The insect-limbed thing hissed, joints flaring green for a heartbeat, then skittered sideways with unnatural speed. The giant's first swing chewed a trench through the iron dust and smashed into a pillar, ringing the circle like a bell. The pillar did not move. The giant laughed, a bark that sounded like rocks tumbling in a kiln, and swung again. The woman came for me. She didn't dance. She cut space into smaller shapes until there was only the path she wanted me to walk. Her blades kissed each other above her wrists, then split apart, their teeth whirring. I felt the first bite on my forearm, shallow, neat, a line of heat that steamed in the air before the blood even fell. I let it sting. Pain here wasn't an alarm, it was a measure. Step, parry, pivot, breathe.
We circled. Chain teeth chewed sparks from my knife, from my bracers, from the lip of the iron dust when she struck low. She was stronger than me, or at least more certain of the angle of her strength. I didn't try to match it. I watched her hips, shoulders, the tiny gather before each lunge. She favored her right when she inhaled, and her left when she exhaled. I filed that away without poetry. Details decide whether you walk out. Behind her, the giant finally met the insect thing squarely. The thing tried for height, scrabbling up his chest with barbed limbs to get at his throat. He head-butted it, once, twice, until something in its face gave with a soft crunch. He hooked his axe up, not down, and split its belly. What spilled out was not guts, but a snarl of wires and meat, trophies strung through sinew. The giant tore a shining knot from inside, a core, a heart, and ground it under his heel. The ring approved. The pillars flared brighter for a breath. My opponent saw my eyes flick, and she punished me for it, blade scissoring. I let my forearm take the scrape to keep my throat. The teeth bit until they met bone and skipped. I twisted inside her guard and felt the chain links across her ribs rasp the skin of my bicep. My knife found a seam. She rolled her shoulder to deny it, turned the cut into a lesson instead of a victory.
We broke apart. She grinned wider. She was not unkind. That realization arrived clean and unexpected. She wanted from me what I wanted from myself, the honest edge. Again, she mouthed, though the ring stole the word and made it a gesture. I obliged. Her next rush came low, blades crossing to shear my knee. I stamped forward rather than back, never back, and let the outside teeth take leather from my boot, while my knife bottomed under her crossed wrists and shoved up. Sparks spit arc-bright between us as chain teeth skittered off my hilt. The smell of cooked oil and iron filled the circle. I got close enough to see the old scars around her mouth, starbursts where something had exploded too near, and the way her eyes steadied when the distance vanished. She liked being too close to think. So did I. She hooked my ankle. I went down on one knee, used the collapse, drove the heel of my hand into her jaw, and rode the give to slide my knife along the chain at her throat. A breath, a nick, a promise. Her answer was a headbutt that left bells in my teeth and blood in my mouth. We separated again, panting, and I realized I was smiling back at her. Not triumph, recognition. The giant finished his work with the insect thing and turned toward us. He took 2 steps, then paused without vanity, as if he could feel the ring's attention settle more keenly on our duel. The ground vibrated. Somewhere beyond the walls, a distant bellow rolled like thunder. For a heartbeat, I smelt hot brass and old blood as plainly as if I stood in a foundry.
My knife hand shook once. I willed it to stillness. The woman saw and nodded as if I had told the truth out loud. She changed her angle and attacked as if to end it. No probe, no tease, just clean, committed murder. I met her, left shoulder into her chest, took the bite on my collarbone instead of my throat, and paid it back by driving the point of my knife up under the whipped chain, past scar into muscle, toward the certainty every fighter carries in the hollow below the breastbone. Her breath hitched. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in pride, as if I had finally found the line she had drawn for me and stepped over it without flinching. She let her blades fall rather than drag me down in spite. Her hands found my wrist and squeezed once, hard, and then she sank to her knees so I could pull the knife free without tearing messily. She bled like a forge, leaks light, steady, hot, unashamed. I held her gaze until it dimmed. When she tipped sideways, I laid her flat and closed her eyes with 2 fingers. I did not speak. The circle does not care for speeches. The giant approached, his breathing a furnace. Up close, his armor was hammered with tiny glyphs, tallies, not prayers. He looked from her to me and gave a curt nod. Approval, not affection. The gong cracked the air again. The pillar's glow shifted from red to white for a blink and then back. I understood enough to understand. We were not finished. We faced each other without ceremony. He raised his axe in both hands, brought it level with his chest, and settled into a stance that said he had killed men larger than me without breaking rhythm.
I rolled my shoulders, spat iron-tasting saliva, and tested my left leg's steadiness. The bite on my collarbone sang. I tucked my chin. My knife felt very small. He advanced with economy, no wasted motion, no flourish. His first swing came from the hips, through the core, the kind of blow that doesn't aim at the body, but at the space the body must occupy to live. I stepped inside at the last instant and felt the wind of the blade comb my hair. My knife scraped harmlessly across his pauldron. He pivoted with ruthless grace and would have split me if I hadn't dropped to both knees, sliding on hot dust, grit burning my skin. The axe kissed the air where my head had been a heartbeat prior and bit sparks from a pillar. The ring approved of neither luck nor panic. It approved of choices. I made another, closed, always closed, and caught the haft under his hands with my forearm, while my knife punched 3 fast times into the seam below his gorget. The second hit something softer than plate. The third slid. He grunted, not in pain, but in acknowledgement, and brought his knee up into my ribs hard enough that my vision flared white. We reset. He bled now, a line that crawled under the armor and fell as bright dots onto the iron dust before vanishing in steam. He tasted it from the corner of his mouth and smiled behind his helm. I discovered I was laughing, not out of madness, but because the world had become very simple and very exact. He feinted high, then committed low. I refused the bait, took the lower blow on my forearm again, felt something crack in there, and used the recoil to drive my shoulder into his sternum.
The axe's teeth squealed. My knife found the notch I had made earlier and insisted. He began to fall, slow as a tower. I followed him down rather than be beneath him, knee on his arm, knife under his jaw where the helm's snout flared. For a moment we were close enough to share breath. His exhale smelled like hot iron and old leather. "Good," he said. The ring let that one syllable live. I gave him what he had earned, clean steel, straight in, no dragging, no flourish. When I stood, my legs shook, not from fear, but from the truth of expenditure. I had spent everything I had brought into the circle. There is relief in that kind of poverty. Silence fell, not empty, but full. The hum eased. The pillar's glow settled back to a steady coal red. Beyond the ring, the training courts continued. The forges sang, juggernauts pounded some unseen plane. Here, in the circle, a verdict ripened. The dog-helmed warden stepped through the arch, as if he had been waiting just beyond the threshold the entire time. He did not look at the bodies. They were part of the grammar here. He looked at me the way a smith looks at a blade cooling on the anvil. Not done, but promising. He pressed his mailed fist against my sternum. Heat licked my skin through the plates of his gauntlet. When he withdrew his hand, something lay in my palm. A thick bronze nail, heavy for its size, one end flattened by a single strike. "Forge it," he said. The voice held the weight of the gate's first word and the field's only law.
Or be forged. I closed my fingers and felt the metal burn a new line into my lifeline. The pain was honest and therefore welcome. As I left the ring, I gathered the fallen woman's chain blade. Not to keep,
This place hates theft, but to lift it clear of the dust and hang it on the rack by the arch, teeth oiled, as sharp as when she had come at me with all her truth. A flesh hound loped near, watched me with furnace eyes, and chuffed once as if I'd answered a question correctly. On the far side of the yard, hammer song rose and fell. I turned toward it, the bronze nail hot in my fist, the knife sticky in my other hand, lungs filling with air that tasted of copper and decision. The circle had not judged me worthy. The circle had judged me willing. That is the only doorway that opens here. I walked through it.
The forges lay beneath the citadel like organs inside a beast. You did not seek them. They pulled you, the way a heartbeat pulls blood. I followed the clangor until the air grew thick with sparks and smoke, and the hammer song settled into my chest. The forge yard sprawled wider than any city square I had known in life. Great furnaces roared like volcanoes chained into submission, their throats glowing white-hot, vomiting heat so thick it boiled the sweat on my skin. Chains hung from the vaults above, each one the size of a warship's anchor chain, each ending in hooks that cradled half-forged weapons or broken blades waiting to be reforged. The ground was dusted with filings, every breath thick with the taste of iron. There were no masters here, no overseers with rods or whips. The smiths labored in silence, faces hidden by helms wrought into grim snarls, their bodies corded with scars and burns. They spoke only through gestures, a hammer raised to correct your swing, a brow cocked to mark your mistake, a nod to say you had done well enough to be allowed to try again. I unclenched the bronze nail still seared into my palm. Its heat had not lessened since the warden pressed it into my hand. I laid it on the anvil. My hands knew the rhythm already, the rhythm of war, the rhythm of war. Strike, turn, quench, strike again. Sparks flew up like a constellation every time the hammer fell, and I wondered if this was how stars were made. One blow, then another, until light consented to live. I beat the nail into a blade. It remembered my hand as if it had always been meant to. The edge took shape quickly, too quickly. I ruined it twice, was forced to hammer the flaws out until my arms burned. I swore under my breath, then realized the forge had no patience for wasted air. Here, anger wasn't wasted, it was fuel. The smith to my left, a giant whose face I never saw, nodded once when I corrected my grip. Approval enough. At night, though here night was nothing more than the embers dimming slightly, I walked the battlements. Below me, the plains cracked like old leather, and upon them thundered the juggernauts. Iron beasts, half machine, half demon, with hides of brass and eyes like molten coals. Each carried a rider in crimson and bronze, his laughter ringing like cymbals as they charged into endless tides of shrieking foes I could not name. Where the juggernaut struck, the ground broke, but the fortress never trembled. It welcomed their weight, as if to say, more, always more. When the juggernauts rested, the flesh-hounds were loosed. They ran silent and swift into the wastes, following scents none of us could smell. Oath-breakers, perhaps, or the stink of fear. They returned with bones clenched between their jaws, dropping them at the feet of the wardens before lying down like wolves around a fire. I came to understand them not as beasts, but as instruments, the same way a hammer is an instrument, blunt, honest, precise in its way. There were other labors, chains to haul, ash to shovel, walls to polish until they gleamed like fresh blood. I came to understand them not as beasts, but as instruments, the same way a hammer is an instrument, blunt,
honest, precise in its way. There were other labors, chains to haul, ash to shovel, walls to polish until they gleamed like fresh blood.
Each task had weight. Each task was a test. The forge is no less a battlefield than the ring, and if your hands faltered, you failed. Sometimes the roar came. It did not come from the smiths or the wardens or even the juggernauts. It came from deeper within the citadel, rolling through the stone and the brass, flattening every knee whether you bent willingly or not. It was not a word, yet I understood it more clearly than any speech I had heard in life. War, courage, offer, earn. When the roar faded, every hammer fell harder, every chain was hauled faster, every blade cut deeper. The longer I labored, the less I remembered of who I had been. The faces of my comrades blurred. The flag I once saluted faded into a curtain, a flimsy thing that had hidden the truth instead of showing it. What mattered now was simpler. To give my all, to take what I could carry, to return upright or not at all. And in that simplicity, I found a strange peace. For the first time in my life, there was no contradiction, no half-truth, no gnawing question of right or wrong. There was only the rhythm, the hammers fall, the rings hum, the juggernauts thunder, the roar in the bones of the citadel. I understood then why sorcery was hated here, not because it was weak, but because it was dishonest. It twisted the straight line, turned courage into trickery, turned offering into theft. Better to die on the edge of truth than to live on the curve of a lie. When I lay down that night on a cot of chains, my hands blistered and my knife beside me, I stared at the skull hook above my bed.
It was empty. I knew it would not stay empty forever, and I smiled. The summons came as iron always does, without preamble, without softness. A length of chain was hurled into my hands, its links heavy enough to drag my shoulders down. It rang against my palms like a struck bell, vibrating long after the thrower had turned away. The dog-helmed warden lifted a gauntlet and pointed toward the outer gates. Run. The command was not shouted. It didn't need to be. The word carried weight like a hammer carries momentum. Once spoken, it pulled you forward whether you wanted it or not. We gathered in silence, 4 of us, warriors with fresh scars still steaming, our weapons newly hammered in the forges. At our feet crouched 2 flesh hounds, lean and crimson, steam venting from their nostrils in angry bursts. Their brass collars glowed with faint runes, and their eyes burned like coal embers. They needed no leash, they needed only a scent. The gates opened with a groan like mountains shifting. Beyond stretched the plain, a skin of cracked iron dust, gouged with trenches that ran like veins, stippled with the burnt-out pits of old fires. The sky above boiled, swollen with ember clouds. The hounds bolted first, paws striking the ground in a rhythm that made the plain shudder. They angled east, straight as an arrow. We followed, sprinting into the heat, lungs searing, armor creaking as sweat boiled between our skin and bronze. Far ahead, the ash shimmered with movement. Shapes writhed against the horizon, shadows trying to flee the light. At first, they looked like mirages. Then the hounds bayed, and the sound peeled away the illusion. The quarry revealed itself, a flock of fear-made flesh. Pale figures, hunched and ragged, armed with little more than shards and desperation. They moved with frantic speed, weaving in arcs, never straight, always curving, always looking over shoulders that hunched, as if expecting the axe at any moment. They smelled of flight, of broken vows. Cowards. The hounds streaked forward, faster than anything with blood should be. Their bodies blurred, claws digging deep furrows in the iron dust.
The cowards shrieked and split like startled vermin, scattering into erratic trails. But fear runs crooked, courage runs straight, and the hounds ran straight. We followed. The first catch came quickly. One hound lunged, jaws clamping onto a spine with a crack that echoed like a smith's hammer. The figure screamed once before being dragged down, limbs flailing. The second hound circled, snapping tendon and throat until silence claimed the victim. We did not stop to watch. The warden's command rang still in my ears. Run. The second quarry stumbled. My legs burned, but my knife was eager. I closed the distance, driving my shoulder into its back, sending us both crashing to the dust. The coward twisted, eyes wide, lips babbling words that had no meaning here. I didn't listen. My knife answered in a single stroke, cutting short the noise. The iron drank the blood eagerly, hissing as if quenched. The hounds bayed approval, their voices rolling across the plain.
The others struck their kills just as clean. There was no cruelty here, no prolonged torment, only the lesson that in this realm flight is death, hesitation is death, dishonor is death. When the last of the cowards had fallen, the hounds slowed and padded among the bodies. One approached me, muzzle stained, and dropped a skull at my feet. Its teeth marks ringed the bone like an engraving. It wasn't a trophy, it was a question. I bent, picked it up, and weighed it in my hand. It was light, fragile, almost laughable compared to the warriors I had faced in the ring. But still, it was proof. Proof of cowardice punished, proof of truth upheld. I hung it from the hook by my belt and felt its weight anchor me deeper into the rhythm of this place. We marched back as the sunless sky boiled above. The hounds padded at our sides, their brass collars steaming, their tongues lolling like satisfied wolves. Behind us, the plain was littered with bones. Ahead, the Brass Citadel loomed, its spires glowing with ember light. When we returned, the dog-helmed warden waited. He looked at the skull swinging from my hook, at the blood drying on my hands, and said nothing. His silence was approval enough. That night, I lay beneath the hook above my cot. It was no longer empty. The skull the hound had given me hung there, swaying slightly in the forge heat. I stared at it until sleep took me. For the first time, my dreams were not of the world I had left. They were of the hunt, the sound of paws striking iron dust, the baying that tore fear into tatters, the clean stroke of the knife, and the silence afterward. And in that silence, I felt something close to joy. It came without warning. I was in the middle of the yard, sweating through drills, dust caked on my skin, my blade carving the air in the rhythm I had learned in the ring. The clang of hammers and the roar of forges had become so constant they were like the heartbeat of this place, background, eternal. Then, everything stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The smiths froze mid-swing, the hounds halted mid-step. Even the juggernauts, whose thundering charges shook the walls, went still, their brass hides steaming in silence. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the ground shook. Not the tremor of battle, not the rumble of charge, but a deeper quake, like the bones of the realm itself shifting. A roar began somewhere below, in the molten heart of the citadel, and rolled upward until it spread across the sky. It wasn't a roar of rage. It was simply presence so vast it could not be ignored. We turned as one toward the central hall. Chains as thick as trees hung from its scorched vault, each link glowing faintly with ember light. The gates there were taller than mountains, carved with snarling visages that seemed to move in the furnace glow, jaws flexing, fangs gnashing.
As they opened, a gust of heat poured forth, hot enough to sting skin, sharp enough to sear the lungs. We did not walk forward. We were pulled. The dog-helmed warden appeared at my side. He did not speak, only pressed a gauntlet into my shoulder and guided me toward the threshold.
The others fell back. I realized suddenly that the summons was not for all of us. It was for me. I stepped inside. The chamber was larger than any cathedral, but it did not feel empty. It felt full. Every inch of air, every ounce of heat pressed against me, as if the realm itself were leaning in to watch. At the far end, a mountain of skulls rose in tiers, thousands upon thousands, their jaws locked in eternal screams, their sockets burning faintly with furnace light. They formed a mound that stretched almost to the ceiling, and upon that mound sat the skull throne. It was not carved, it was not built. It looked as if a volcano had decided to sit down and rest. Brass fused with bone, iron crusted with dried blood, molten cracks blowing faintly beneath its surface. And seated upon it, I could not lift my eyes higher than the knees. Even that nearly broke me. The sheer weight of the presence pressed me down, stripping me bare of every falsehood, every pretense. It wasn't malice, it wasn't judgment, it was truth. Heavy and unrelenting, and under its gaze I was as naked as the day I was born. My legs wanted to buckle, my chest wanted to collapse, but something deeper kept me upright. Not defiance, not courage, but necessity. To stand was the only honest thing to do. The roar came again, but this time it was not around me, it was through me. It tore down the walls I had built inside myself, shattered every excuse, every justification. It spoke no words, yet I understood it perfectly. War, courage, offer, earn. I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw myself forward, to empty my chest in some cry of devotion. But I knew instinctively that here words were theft. Deeds were the only offering. Breath wasted on speech was breath stolen from the blade. The skull throne did not ask who I had been. It did not care. The life before this realm was ash. Here I was measured only by what I could give, what I could take, what I could endure. Something stirred deep in my chest, a heat that wasn't fear and wasn't pride. It was closer to recognition, like staring into a mirror for the first time and realizing you had never truly seen yourself before. I lowered my head, not in surrender, but in respect. The roar swelled until the chamber shook. Skulls rattled and shifted on the mound, clicking together like dice in a god's hand. The lake of blood at the throne's feet bubbled and hissed, spraying red steam into the air. For a heartbeat, I thought it would swallow me, drown me, erase me. But then it subsided. The pressure lifted, just enough for me to breathe again. My chest heaved, my throat raw though I had not spoken. My heart beat so loud I thought it would split me in two. And then silence. I don't know how long I stood there. A moment, a lifetime. Time is a weak thing here. But eventually, the dog-helmed warden placed his hand on my shoulder again. I hadn't even seen him follow me in. He steered me back toward the gates. My legs moved without my permission. When I stepped outside into the courtyards again, the clangor resumed. Hammers fell, blades clashed, juggernauts thundered. The world continued, as if nothing had paused. Only I knew what had changed. I understood now why sorcery had no place here. It wasn't about weakness, it was about interference. Sorcery was a fog laid between a man and his trial, a trick to tilt the blade when it should fall straight.
Better to fail clean, to die honestly, than to live by a bent truth. That night, when I lay beneath the skull I had earned in the hunt, I stared at it and whispered, not aloud, but in the marrow of my bones, "When it is time, mine will join you." And for the first time since I had died, I knew exactly where I belonged.
Battle here did not come with fanfare. No horns, no banners unfurled in the wind, no speeches from commanders perched on high. It came as naturally as weather. One moment the forges roared and the hounds dozed. The next, the walls shivered with the drumbeat of approaching war. We assembled wordlessly, armor strapped on with steady hands, weapons tested with single, clean strikes against stone. My banner, still blank, still heavy, hung from a pole I lashed to my back. I felt its weight dig into my shoulders, dragging me down, but I carried it. It wasn't decoration, it was a burden. The gates opened, and the enemy poured across the plain. I do not know what they were. Shapes made of teeth and shrieks. Flesh swollen with madness, limbs that bent wrong, eyes too many, mouths without sound. They boiled out of the haze like a fever dream, a tide of desperation and rage. Perhaps they were echoes of mortals, the kind that prayed for mercy in their last moments. Perhaps they were demons of a god who did not rule here. It didn't matter. Their names were lies. Their existence was noise. We met them with silence. The juggernauts thundered first, iron bodies plowing through the front ranks like plows through brittle soil. Their riders swung axes that glowed red in the furnace light, each strike tearing limbs and skulls free, spraying the air with fire-hot ichor. Behind them came the flesh hounds, weaving in and out, their fangs locking on throats and dragging prey down into silence. And then came us. We clashed in a storm of steel. The first thing I learned was that here, death had no time to linger. When an enemy fell, its body was already half melted into the iron dust, its blood hissing into steam. There were no corpses to trip over, no trophies to scavenge. Only the offering, the fight itself. I swung until my shoulders ached, until my ribs burned where old wounds reopened. I felt the ring's rhythm return in every stroke. Step, block, cut, pivot, breathe. My knife was an extension of my will, and my will was simple: strike true or fall. Around me, warriors moved without formation, yet never collided. Each fought his own battle, yet together we were a tide. Not united by orders, but by purpose. And purpose was louder than any trumpet. One creature lunged at me, its body stitched from too many torsos, each face screaming independently. I did not flinch. I stepped into its embrace, jammed my knife into the hollow of its chest, and tore sideways. The faces shrieked in unison, then went quiet as the body dissolved into mist. My banner shifted on my back, the cloth snapping in the furnace wind, and for a moment I imagined it carried color already, stained not with dye, but with the weight of each strike I had given. We fought until the plain was quiet again. The juggernauts pawed the ground, snorting, their riders slick with blood and grinning like skulls. The flesh hounds licked steaming fangs, dropping scraps of bone that hissed away into nothing. And we stood, chests heaving, weapons heavy with use. No cheer went up. No songs were sung. The silence itself was the victory. That night I sat by the forge, knife across my knees, staring into the flames. My body screamed with pain, but pain here was not an enemy. It was a teacher. Every scar was a mark in a ledger, every ache a lesson. I stopped counting them. Numbers belonged to the world I had left. Here there was only weight. Dreams came to me when I slept. Not of home. Home had dissolved long ago. Not of comrades, those faces blurred, voices muffled. My dreams were of the fight itself, the purity of it, the way the blade sang when it met another, the way fear dissolved when met head-on. And slowly, I began to realize something that should have terrified me. I loved it. Not the killing, not the blood. Those were only outcomes. I loved the clarity, the honesty of a world stripped down to a single question. Will you stand or will you fall? Every battle answered that question again and again. And every time I stood, I felt less like a man who had stumbled into this realm, and more like a piece of it, hammered and shaped to fit. I stopped telling myself stories about why I fought. Duty, survival, pride, all lies I had carried from the mortal world. Here, the only true answer was because fighting was what I was made for. Some nights I woke with tears in my eyes, and I didn't know if they were from joy or despair. Perhaps both. But either way, I woke smiling. War without lies. That is what this place had given me. The warden came to me at dawn, or what passed for dawn here. The sky was no lighter, no darker, but the air carried a shift, a sense that one night had ended and another cycle of labor and war had begun. He held no weapon this time, only a folded square of heavy cloth. He thrust it into my chest. Earn its colors. That was all he said before turning away, his dog helm glinting in the forge light. I unfolded the cloth. Blank, thick, coarse, black as cooled iron. It was a banner, a standard, the kind I had seen others bear in battle. Most were scarred with colors, symbols hammered or stitched or burned into them. Mine was nothing, empty, a weight without meaning. I lashed it to the pole on my back and carried it into battle that day. The fighting was fierce, as it always was, but this time I felt every strike drag heavier. The banner pulled on my shoulders like a chain. Enemies clawed at me, struck at me, screamed in my ears, and all the while the weight of that cloth demanded more from me. I did not falter. I could not. If the banner was blank, then each strike, each skull taken, each drop of blood offered had to write upon it in invisible ink until the time came for true colors. Battle after battle blurred together. The juggernauts thundered, the flesh-hounds bayed, the Forge brothers fought with teeth and steel. I carried the standard through dust and ash, through rivers of blood, through the roar of victory and the silence afterward. I did not set it down. I did not let it fall. And when others died beside me, men and women who had fought with courage, who had stood until the end, I took their skulls with my own hands. Not for me, not as trophies, for the hook above their cots, so that their memory would weigh the walls of this place as heavily as my own would one day. Each skull was hung with care, and the citadel accepted them, silent but approving. When at last the warden summoned me again, I stood before him with the blank banner still stiff across my shoulders. He gestured toward a basin. It was wide, shallow, filled with liquid the color of fire at its hottest point, molten dye, searing to the touch. Others had dipped their banners into it before me, staining them red or black or gold. I knew this was my turn. I thought of home, the faces I had left behind, the flag I had once saluted. None of it felt real anymore. Those memories were thin, paper compared to iron. They carried no weight. So I thought instead of the ring.
of the woman with chain blades who had smiled as I struck her down, of the giant who had said "good" as the blade pierced his throat, of the hounds who had dropped skulls at my feet, questions I had answered with steel, of the roar that had shaken me to my marrow, stripping me bare and leaving only truth. I dipped the banner. When I pulled it free, it was no longer black. It was brass, gleaming in the forge light, rimmed with black like cooling metal. Down the center, I stained a single line of red, a wound that would never close, a promise always kept. I stitched a symbol into its heart with my own hands. Not an axe, not a skull, not a juggernaut. A hand, open, palm up.
Offer. When I carried it into the next sally, the banner snapped in the furnace wind. Warriors fought harder in its shadow, their blows ringing sharper. Skulls were taken with cleaner cuts, their weight hung heavier on the hooks at day's end. And when I stood among the fallen, raising the banner high, I realized something with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. I had not just earned the standards colors, I had earned myself. I was no longer a soldier who stumbled into this place by accident. I was part of its rhythm now, part of the hammer song, part of the roar. I belonged to the line that never bent, never broke, never begged. I had fallen in love, not with death, not with blood, not with killing, but with truth. And in Khorne's realm, truth is always carried on a blade. The day came without warning, as all days did here. No omen, no dream. Only the sudden hush that fell across the citadel, as though the forge winds themselves held their breath. I knew before the warden arrived. My skull had been weighed, and the summons was upon me. He appeared with no ceremony, the dog helm's fangs snarl catching the forge glow. His gauntlet closed on my shoulder with the weight of inevitability. He did not speak. He did not need to. My legs carried me forward, step by step, through the yards where flesh hounds raised their heads, through the forges where hammers froze mid-swing, through the battlements where juggernauts pawed the ground and riders saluted with blood-wet blades. The gates of the great hall yawned open once more.
The heat hit me like a tide, thick and suffocating, filled with the smell of blood and brass. The chamber was just as I remembered. The mountain of skulls towered, impossibly vast. The lake of blood hissed and steamed at the throne's feet, and the skull throne itself loomed, radiating a presence that pressed down on me until my bones ached. I did not falter this time. I walked forward, each step loud in the silence, until I stood at the base of the skull mound. My banner weighed heavy on my back, my blade still slick from battles past, my breath steady despite the fire in the air. I dropped to one knee, not in weakness, not in surrender, but in offering. I placed the banner on the iron ground, spread wide so the brass and black gleamed in the furnace light, the red stripe burning like a fresh wound. Then I pressed my palm to my chest and raised my head toward the throne. "My skull," I said. My voice was rough, burned raw from battles, but it carried. "When it is time, and all I can carry until then." The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. Skulls clicked and shifted on the mountain, as if some unseen hand sorted them. The lake bubbled. The heat grew unbearable, scalding tears from my eyes. Still, I did not look away. Then it came, the roar. Not around me, not even through me this time. It was me. It filled my lungs, rattled my bones, shook the blood in my veins until I thought it might boil. It was not approval, nor was it condemnation. It was acknowledgement, recognition.
The acceptance of an oath, freely given and freely understood. The roar rolled outward, past me, through the walls of the citadel, across the endless plains, into the wastes beyond. I felt it answer itself in the juggernaut's thunder, in the hounds baying, in the ring where warriors struck each other with renewed fury. I bowed my head, not in fear, but in belonging. When I left the chamber, the banner no longer felt heavy. It floated on the wind behind me, snapping with each step, alive with color and meaning. Fleshhounds fell into step at my heels, their furnace eyes glowing with approval. Somewhere beyond the walls, juggernauts thundered, the ground cracking joyfully under their weight. The warden with the dog helm met me outside. He said nothing. He only pressed his gauntlet to his chest and inclined his head slightly, the closest thing to reverence I had ever seen from him. I returned the gesture. From that day on, I was no longer merely a soldier, nor even a warrior of the citadel. I was a piece of it, hammered and shaped into truth. My skull had been promised, and until the day it was taken, I would offer all that I had, blade, blood, breath, and bone. And when that day came, when my knees finally buckled, and my stance slipped, and my edge dulled, I would walk into that chamber once more. I would climb the mound of skulls, step by step, until the climb ended, and I would lay my head where it belonged. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. Not shouted, not begged.
Simply understood.